Brady Boys Club, originally the Brady Club for Working Lads, was established by Lady Rothschild, the wife of the first Lord Rothschild, who was in the process of building the Brady Street buildings, specifically for the Jewish working poor. And that was toward the end of the 19th century. I know that the Brady Boys Club was originally the rectory of a nearby church. The buildings housed only Jewish families, but Mrs. Lady Rothschild wanted the club to be available to all working lads, not simply Jewish working lads, but working lads generally. So it did not start its life as a Jewish youth club. It started its life as a youth club available to all. But given that it was adjacent to this very large block of flats with hundreds of Jewish kids, the membership was almost entirely Jewish. And so by default, it became a Jewish club, and it was finally decided a few years after its initiation that it should be known as a Jewish youth club. So it was in fact the first Jewish youth club in the United Kingdom. That was 1896, and thereafter, Lady Rothschild and her friends donated sums of money annually to the club to fund its work. And so it was a very simple beginning. Of course, it grew into the Jewish Youth Club movement, grew into an association called the Association for Jewish Youth, and there were Jewish youth clubs within, I would say, 15 years of Brady opening. There were Jewish youth clubs in all the areas where Jews lived in London, and then spread to Liverpool and Manchester and Birmingham. But Brady came first, and it was always, I think, seen as the one of, if not the outstanding youth club in the East End of London, whether it was Jewish or not Jewish. The boys were encouraged to be the best they could be. They weren't being forced to be what they weren't. They were encouraged to be the best they could be. And somehow Yogi inspired that. He was a refugee. He originally, I remember, it was interned, as most Jewish refugees were. Jews were allowed into the British Army, and he was recruited to the OSE, Special Operations. So he had a background. He had a background which was, I suppose, to us, seemed rather heroic. But I think the real quality was in the man himself, and as I deeply believe, for him it was a project that we had to overcome what had happened in the war, and we had to prove that there was still a Jewish community in Europe, and a Jewish community that would strive to recover. And I think that's, for me, when I look back on it, was his greatest achievement. And I don't know how many other people see it that way or understand it that way, but that's the way that I understand Yogi and what he stood for. Yeah, there were three. I think there were three things. I think one was the amount of talent that the club encouraged, brought out the very best, and encouraged. And and as you I'm sure are aware, there was always, through good times and bad, a thing called Jewish humour. And Jewish humour was manifest in the club. It was sometimes utterly hilarious, and we had a drama group. We had a concert party. The concert party was made up of the most talented boys in the club. They could sing. They could write skits and that would bust your gut laughing. They were hilarious. And in the end, they and some of the girls from the girls' club put on shows in the girls' club hall where people queued to get in. They were so popular. And that talent was given an opportunity to express itself, and the people who directed the drama group and the concert party group were themselves hugely talented, and they brought out the best, and it was unbelievably high quality. And it came out of kids who'd grown up in these tenement blocks that the Rothschilds and their friends had so kindly built. To mark the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Brady Boys Club. And I very quickly had a Brady boy who actually was in the publishing business say, well, you do the book and I'll publish it. I very quickly had another Brady boy who was in the paper business who said, you do the book and I'll provide the paper. So before very long, it was a project that came to fruition because I had Brady boys around me who were able to provide, if you like, the infrastructure for the book. And I just then sat down and started to write the story from Lady Rothschild onwards. And I knew that I could only successfully depict the club's history through photographs and newspaper cuttings. And so I set about, first they asked everybody I could find who had been to the club to send me material that they had. And I got a mass of it, huge amount arrived. Then I went to Bancroft Road Library and went through their archives. Then I went to the newspaper library, which was then in Colindale, and went through all the East End newspapers, the Jewish newspapers of the time, and so on, and finally ended up with thousands of pieces of material cut from newspapers, copies of newspapers, and then I just had the task of putting it together, and I put it together with the chap who was the publisher, Anne Levy, used a particular designer. And so he made him available to me, and he and I met regularly, putting page by page together, and I then wrote a bit of history of the East End and the history of the club and its achievements to mark the periods. And then at the end of it all, took 2 years. This was the book that we had a big ceremony to mark the 100th anniversary, and that's when I presented the book to the club.